Yeah, today we just want to give you a briefing of quite a wide-ranging but quite deep initiative. We've observed some issues that we don't think we think could be tackled better. What we'd like really, what we're doing is sharing this with a wide group of people, a lot of people here today. Love to get your feedback, find out what you think, what you think, what your experiences are. And for some of you, we'd love to get you involved in the overall initiative, and look for opportunities to do that. The overall project we're starting to call the Pathways Project, which is quite a wide-ranging initiative. This is one of the first funded pieces called Inclusive Wayfinding Toolkit, and it's based on, I don't think I've probably got to make the case with you, but it's based on the assumption that activity is good for people's health, community, prosperity, and climate change. We're not trying to make that case. What we're interested in is how can we have more? How can we generate more activity? Really interesting. We've studied a little bit the one presenter who you haven't been able to get, Simon, the Kidlington, the impact of wayfinding can be significant, and I'll wait for them to present that to you as to the significance that it can show. But in all the other projects that we've worked on, we've seen the degree of significance it can have, and we think it's understood and maligned. So the objective is, how do we get people to walk, cycle, and wheel with confidence and to increase activity? Next slide, please, Mark. I mean, this is a document we're happy to share with you. So it's there isn't a lot more words. It's based on the observation that we have a national wayfinding system that works really well for our roads. It was designed in 1963 by a team of designers. It's regarded around the world as one of the best examples. It's been, I won't say copied, but elements of it and its structure has been duplicated by many other road wayfinding systems. And what's interesting is that in 1963, walking and cycling was actually in the system. In 1964, walking and cycling was taken out. What was left was basically blue signs with a walking person and a bike as images. And there is really very little other guidance in TSRGD, as if you're a transport planner, you know it now, transport signs and regulations. But walking and cycling was taken out. Now, we think it was, we don't know why. We've been researching how it was done and why it was done and what happened. The only assumption we can make is that we actually think that walking and cycling, guiding people to do walking and cycling, is about 3 or 4 times more complicated than the road sign system. That's, I mean, number one, there's a path either side of the road. So you've immediately doubled the complexity. But that doesn't mean nowadays, knowing what we know and the technology and the knowledge that we've got, that it's not possible. If you go to the next slide, please, Mark. So in some of the work we've done throughout the UK, we worked on Legible London, we devised that. We've worked in Liverpool, we've worked in Glasgow, we've worked with Sustrans on the NCN and doing a big assessment of that. And what we found is that walking and cycling information, how to behave, where to go, where do places go, is really patchy throughout the UK. There's some really good stuff, and there's a load of stuff missing, and there's some really confusing things in between. One of the problems is that you go along a reasonable journey and you might cross a borough boundary, the situation might change, how things work is different. We've done a much bigger assessment. This is really capturing a picture of this. But for example, painting cycle paths different colors, there is no reason to those different colors. Often information is missing. Directional information doesn't join up. I'm sure you're all aware of these instances, and probably could point to where it's good and where it's not. One of the issues is that you can't have difference. People find it difficult if it's good 1 minute, but then it's missing the next. Why is it this way? And one of the reasons we think is that we found over 20 pieces of guidance. So if you're a local authority and you're trying to implement, you're trying to generate more activity, how can I use information to do that? There's over 20 pieces of guidance, but none of them really get to the bottom of how you do wayfinding very well. Within LTN 120, which is really the government's document about this now, there's only 6 pages on it. This is our expertise, and that is really not enough to be able to define and design a national system. It's nowhere near enough. And if any of you actually have looked at TSRGD, it's now 7 documents and about that thick, and that's for the road sign system. So we think there's a gap there. Most of these documents are either policy, you need to create a network and comments like this, or they're more infrastructure. This is actually how to design a segregated cycle path. If you go to the next slide, please, Mark. So if we take those observations and we put them in a different, if we just present them in a different way, if we have an axis where top to bottom, you've got high quality, usability, tested and proven system, such as TSRGD, the road sign system. And down at the bottom, you've got low quality, usability, untested. And what I mean there is that you can make an assessment as to whether something is high quality enough, but really the only assessment that matters is actually people on the street. Does it work for them? And we've actually dug out the original design in 1963. We've dug out some film of them testing it, driving up to signs and trying different sizes out, seeing which ones work, trialing different colors to indicate different things. So the point is that the road sign system was tested with people, and therefore it's proven to work. There's lots of instances where some of the systems that we're trying to put in actually have not been tested. And therefore they might work, but they very probably won't. When we designed Legible London, we did a huge amount of testing on the street. We take all the designs on the street, we get people to use them, and then we'd listen, watch, and find out what they thought to work out actually, does it really work? Because there's only a point of doing something that really works. The axis going from left to right is the reality that we need local authorities, over 400 of them in the UK, to be implementing these systems. But how can central organizations provide the standards and the playbooks and the guidance to empower local authorities to be able to implement them so that they're consistent, they work between the borders of the local authorities, and the local authorities are not having to reinvent the wheel, they're not developing different ways of doing things. There is absolutely space for having local character, but there is certain symbols of how to behave that really would be, it's more logical that they're national. At the moment, there's no really way of doing that. And the result is that we're getting quite low quality implementation, a real mix. So for example, when you drive from one local authority to another in your car, the road sign system doesn't change. You don't notice the borough boundary. You might see a sign saying you're entering Wiltshire or something, and that's about all you'll get. But the road sign system does not change. It is predictable and similar throughout the UK, and there's a real logical reason as to why that works. So if that's the situation, we need national standards would benefit everybody. How do we apply those locally? And let's make sure if we're going to create some standards, let's make them the best we possibly can. And that's the crux of this initiative. If you go to the next slide, one of the first funded pieces of work is an Inclusive Wayfinding Toolkit. And this is a prototype. This is a first example. And we're aiming to complete this by the end of January. So this is not slow. And it won't be correct. It needs to be tested. It needs to be worked on. What we're doing is we're driving upwards, and we're using the idea of it being inclusive. How does this work for everybody? How does this specifically work for people? We're funded by the Design Age Institute at this point. How does it work for people 60 years plus? And that brings a number of issues such as anxieties, and physical disabilities into the mix. So how does it work for them? So I'll give you one little example. Is we've been holding a number of focus groups and workshops and walking around with people aged 60 plus. It's really interesting to hear that there's a wonderful walking path along the river. Quote from 3 people on one of these panels, but I don't like walking along that path. Why not, we ask? Because it would be ideal for you because of the speed of the cyclist shooting past me. When we actually walk that path ourselves, we found that there are signs saying no cycling. Yet there's lots of cyclists completely ignoring all those signs. So what we have there, and I'm not saying this is everywhere in the UK, but what we have there is we've got elderly people not wanting to go on a walking path because they may get knocked over by fast cyclists. And we've got fast cyclists actually just ignoring signs that say no cycling. So we're reducing activity, maybe increasing activity by allowing cyclists along there by not stopping them, but we're reducing activity for people over 60 who would really benefit the most from being active. So that's getting these issues up front, and how do we design a system that can have both of these parties live well together? It is the crux of that. And then techniques that we're well versed in is that how do you, when you've established a good standard, how can you allow and enable 400 local authorities to implement a good standard in a high quality way? So there's no point in having a really good standard and nobody knows how to implement it. Example we've got there is from, I don't know if there's anybody from Bath Council, Baines. They've recently implemented a segregated cycle path all the way through a town just outside Bath. They've had 40 accidents in the first year. They spoke to us and they were really frustrated because they designed it completely to LTN 120 standards. What I don't think they realize is they've put the cycle path in the wrong place. But there's nowhere in LTN 120 that really tells you where to put it. So that's an issue of, it may be a good standard, but it's not actually, people aren't able to apply it. If you go to the next slide, please, Mark. What's at the heart of wayfinding is, and this is a wayfinding hierarchy of needs, is what the audience, what the public are really searching for is predictability. It just needs to be the same every time, so I don't have to think about it. If you think about the road sign system, you come up to a junction, there's going to be a sign saying give way. If you get to a roundabout, there's going to be signs telling you which way they go. Even if your sat nav is telling you, that road sign there is giving you a confirmation. And please remember, when you're walking and cycling, you are much less likely to be using a sat nav. Sat navs with cars powered in front of you is a well now adopted technique of navigating. It's not the same for being on a bike, and definitely not the same when you're walking. On top of predictability is awareness. What we found from the research that we've done is a lot of people are unaware of what's around the corner, how far it goes. Are there toilets along the way? Does this actually go to the town centre? People are unaware, and if they're unaware, what we know about human behaviour is you don't actually even think it's possible, and when it is. And then how can we make people feel as though they can do it? How can we overcome those anxieties and make it easy so that they tell themselves and they tell others that walking to the shops, going to the park is easier done on a bike or by a short walk. That's how we think real behavior change can happen. And of course, this is not stopping the need, it's not replacing the need for improving infrastructure, improving environments, improving widths, improving cycleways. All of those things need to be tackled at the same time. It's not replacing those. This is layering on top. And nearly finished, and then please love to get your feedback. Next slide, please, Mark. This is the overall program. We're in the middle of phase 2. We're looking for opportunities for more research and development because we think this needs to be really deeply researched and deeply designed. And we're looking to implement in a number of pilots, 3 to 5 pilots, different places, different issues, different urban forms, so city centre, suburb, regional connectors. Because if we're developing a system that needs to work for the whole of the UK, we've got to have something that can adapt. So that's the program that we're on. We're working with a range of organisations, and Mark can give you a briefing on the different people that we're talking to for funding different parts of this. This is not directly coming from the Department of Transport, but we think they are one of the eventual sponsors of a system such as this. Next slide, please, Mark. We think, I think I've just mentioned the impact that we think this can have. We invented and proposed the idea of Legible London and developed that as a system. We based Legible London on how it works actually on the road sign system. It's a version of the road sign system. So there are examples of where this works. And since Legible London has been implemented, walking in London has gone up 5%. Now that's billions of journeys. And we also feel that no budgets have been cut, and there are horror stories every day on the news with budgets. But there is budget being spent on active travel. There's budget being spent on wayfinding programs. But all these programs are kind of starting at the same point. How can we focus our energies, develop a really high quality system, and then use the budgets that we've got to implement that? And if we can show impact and results on every stage of development, then I'm sure we're going to be able to generate more funding for something that really works. And I think the last slide I've probably covered, Mark, is just our background. We worked on Waltham Forest. We've developed transport systems for Toronto, currently doing that in the Bay Area, cycling systems in Vancouver, Legible London. We're also the global wayfinding designers for Google, so we know how to scale things. We're funded by the Design Age Institute at this point. Our partners are Sustrans and the Helen Hamlin Centre for Design, and the funding actually eventually is sourced from Innovate UK. So Mark, I don't know if you want to just give us a little briefing on the people we've been speaking to so far, who we've been engaging with.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yeah, Tim and I have spent the last 6 months talking to quite an array of stakeholders, really from national to regional to local. And as you can imagine, in terms of landowners and complexity, it is quite complex. Starting with Active Travel England, we've been in conversation with Martin Key, who's the strategy director there, right-hand man to Chris Boardman, and we've connected with Chris Boardman, and we have strong support from them. Those of you from Sport England will know that we've on the call will know that we've been speaking to Nick Evans and Chloe and others. Gemma from the TCPA will likewise know that we've been speaking to the TCPA. We've spoken extensively with the local government association and with ADET, the director, the transport directors, and Sustrans in terms of England, Scotland, and Wales, because this is a UK-wide project. And there are, I mean, I could go on. We've Liverpool City Region, Transport for Greater Manchester, GM Moving, it's WECA, etc., etc. And I think it's fair to say that what we're getting back is one, a strong interest, and two, just a sort of recognition that the current situation isn't making the most of all the billions that are being put into infrastructure, building and design for active travel. And so wayfinding does have an important space, but that it is not optimized at the moment. So that's just a quick thumbnail sketch of stakeholder engagement.
Tim and Mark, thank you so much for your presentation, for the really candid responses in the Q&A as well. There are a few other questions and links popping up in the chat, and if there's any of those that you'd like to respond to, then please do. So we'll move on now to a green infrastructure project, the River Cole project in East Birmingham, which was a project designed to rehabilitate the green space in that area, creating a green corridor to improve biodiversity and community activity. A brilliant project, and Dr. Emily Prestwood and Susan Keung have been involved in that from its inception right through to its successful implementation. So Emily and Susan, thank you for joining us today. Emily is Development Manager with Birmingham Energy Institute, and Susan is Director of Knowledge and Insight with the Active Wellbeing Society in Birmingham. Welcome.
Hey. So hopefully you can see the presentation.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, right. Hi. Yeah, so I'm starting off today, and then Susan's going to take over for the second part of the presentation. As Simon just said, this presentation is about a project to rehabilitate an area of green and blue space in East Birmingham, along the River Cole, which is a river that runs through South Birmingham, through East Birmingham, out to Solihull, a bit further along. This has been it's been predominantly an ERDF funded project with a variety of partners. University of Birmingham, quite unusually, have been the lead partner on the project, though working closely with the council, who are a partner on the project and whose land the green and blue space that's been rehabilitated is. So this is just the starter slide, and the picture in the top left just gives you an idea of the green space that we're talking about. So it's actually quite a big area. It's kind of about 55 hectare site that's just the project area, and that's linking to a much wider green infrastructure. But it's quite it's a very industrial urban part of the city, which is partly why we were doing the project there, but then also creates a lot of challenges around really about how we incorporate that and make sure that people know that the green space is there and can be used, which has been one of the main aims of the project. Okay. Yeah, so yes, I mentioned about the green infrastructure. On the top right, there's a graphic done by the council that shows the green and blue spaces in East Birmingham. Birmingham's a big city, second biggest city, and East Birmingham is an area within that is the same size as, say, I could never remember whether we say Nottingham or Derby, but it's essentially the size of another city within the UK, within Birmingham. And it's a big focus for the city council in terms of development, due to it being a predominantly deprived area. So a lot of the wards within Birmingham, Birmingham overall is a deprived city, but East Birmingham is a deprived part of a deprived city. So looking at how the green space and the development of the green space supports that economic inclusive growth strategy for East Birmingham is a key part, and is a key kind of aim of this project. And you can see on the map on the right, there's a green corridor that runs out, and that's along the River Cole. The area where the project is focused is at the bottom of that. You can just see where it says Hay Mills. So it's around that project. And this map in the centre focuses in on that project area and identifies some of the sort of main needs in terms of barriers to connecting to that green space, and where there needs to be more information about joining it. And then on the left, you can just see some of the figures about how this connects to the wider infrastructure within East Birmingham. So this is just a small part of the green infrastructure in East Birmingham. It's actually quite an important part in terms of how it links up with infrastructure within the rest of the city. So along the River Cole pathway, you're linking out to East Birmingham and Solihull along that corridor. But you're also, you can see on this map on the bottom left, it also intersects with the Grand Union Canal, and that infrastructure along there going into the city centre if you go west, and then also going out east and south, eventually to London along the Grand Union Canal. But then there's also an intersection continue along the River Cole going into South Birmingham. So there's the potential, by improving this area of green space, as well as the biodiversity and other improvements that we've made to the green space and creation of play areas, there's this big potential to connect up a lot better with with this cycling and walking infrastructure along significant distances along both the canal and the river paths, and then connecting with other canal and river networks in Birmingham. So that's broadly the aim. And then on the right, of course, there's an aerial photo of the area which shows some of that green corridor going up there, but then also gives you a bit of a perspective of the type of area. So one of the reasons the university is involved is because there's Tynesy Energy Park is located here, and that's a site for energy innovation within East Birmingham. The university is working in partnership with Tynesy Energy Park and the council to develop this part of East Birmingham as a green energy innovation zone, or quarter, I think we're calling it. So there's a lot of potential for research and innovation, technology innovation, and as part of the city's climate net zero transition. But at the moment, that's not really of benefit to the people living in the area. So part of this project is about how we can link the people via the green space to that research and innovation that's happening at Tynesy Energy Park, and ensure that what's happening there and the development is of benefit to people living in the area, and not just in a kind of indirect way in terms of economic growth for the city, for the wider city, but of actual benefit. So yes, just before moving on to talk more about our wayfinding on the project, as I mentioned, this is part of an ERDF project, but is also working with Sport England, who in particular are funding the wayfinding aspects of the project, and then University of Birmingham, the Active Wellbeing Society, that Susan's here from, Birmingham City Council, and the Environment Agency. So they are our main partners on the project in terms of match funding. But then behind that, there's a much wider partnership and network of organisations involved in the design and delivery of the project. So in terms of wayfinding, I've mentioned that there are several barriers. I think the key barriers in this place that stop that connection, stop the area being a connection between the north, east, west and south, is there's a couple of main features. So here on the top right, you can see there's a road, Energy Way, which was built fairly recently, and is a road from the A45, which is another kind of big barrier, a big bypass, essentially. But you have this road going on here, and this is a through route for waste trucks that go into the Veolia household waste incinerator plant here. But this cuts across the River Cole footpath. So that's a barrier both in terms of crossing it, because it's not good in terms of crossing, but also in terms of knowing that there is some green space once you come off the A45 here, the River Cole, that there's some green space beyond there that leads to the canal, and then another part of the project area, which is called Ackers, where there's an adventure site and a wide expanse of green space. So that was one of the significant barriers. And then there's another barrier here. So the picture on the bottom left, where the path along the river joins the Grand Union Canal, and then you have to go over the canal to get into this green space here, the Ackers area I've just mentioned, and join these paths going south, and then also through the green space. And at the moment, and it's something we haven't been able to address on the ERDF project because it's beyond the remit, but it's something we're looking at how we can develop in the future. At the moment, there's some stairs going up from the canal towpath, which don't have any. They're very steep stairs. I mean, they're difficult enough for walking, but you have to be quite strong to lift your bike over that. There's also no signage that there is anywhere for you to go once you're off the canal towpath. It's also not clear which way is towards the city centre, or where else you can go. There was a sign on the canal towpath that pointed to the Grand Union Canal, so you know you're on the canal, and then also pointed to London, but that's not massively useful in terms of knowing where you can go. So I think part of the project is looking at how wayfinding can start to help address some of those infrastructure barriers that are there, and start to bring people back into using this area. So yes, in terms of the wayfinding, the big challenge for this project is that this is an underutilized area of green space. You've got, a lot of dense housing around there, despite the kind of industrial nature as well. There's a lot of people living in the area. There's a large number of schools adjacent to the green space, but most people don't know it's there. They don't know that the green space exists because it's blocked to them by those physical barriers of the A45, and issues due to sort of some of the access routes, but then also just a lack of information about the green space being there. And even if you make it onto the green space, it's not always clear that it's publicly accessible green space, or where you're going to go when you enter it. So a big part of the projects and the work with Sport England was around improving the wayfinding through signage in the area. And this was through two main points of signage. So we've got the map signs that you can see there, which present the project area essentially and set out the environmental improvements that have been made, which include creation of a meadow, removal of a weir, and also identify some of the public green spaces that have been created on the project, so play area, gym area, etc. And then we've also looked at these finger post signage, which are intended to be internal to the project area, and directing people to the new green spaces. And we've looked at points where we can put those in where it's been highlighted through engagement and consultation that people aren't sure where they can go, which direction they're heading, or that there's anything down there if they go that way. So the map on the left is kind of a combination of work. So some initial work done by landscape designers, which was based on some work which I'll show on the next slide, done by the council around the wider cycling and walking network and infrastructure and signage needed in the area. and then identifying within a kind of limited budget for the project the key points where we need to start putting in infrastructure, so that or wayfinding and signage, so that people know that the area exists and there's somewhere to go. And you can see a wider list of points identified where we would ideally look to put in additional wayfinding and signage in the future. And listening to the previous presentation, I think it's really interesting to think about. I mean, our aim very much for this project is how you get people to use the green space and to know it's there. And that's kind of the focus of the signage and where we've put it, that people know they can go through it. But how that changes when you get people to use the area and you're thinking about shared use of paths, I think could be, really interesting to think about. Because I think, definitely our focus has been on, how you get people there in the first place. So as I mentioned, I think deciding where the priority locations for signage were, though this signage and wayfinding is kind of internal to the project area and this River Cole Community Commons, it's very much wanted it to align with sort of potential future plans by the council for extending their cycling and walking infrastructure. So the map on the left is just showing proposed, existing and proposed cycle routes, and then the graphics on the right are just taken from some work that was done a few years ago that hasn't been fully implemented yet, which identified locations throughout this part of the city along the River Cole, where signage was needed as part of the city's cycling and walking infrastructure. So yes, I'm not quite sure with the council what stage that's at in terms of implementing it, and I don't think there's anybody here from Birmingham other than me and Susan, but Birmingham City Council has also just submitted a letter of notice for bankruptcy. So I'm not sure how that will be progressing. But yes, we were very keen to ensure that what we were putting within the project area aligned with the thinking that had already gone in by the council around the wayfinding needed, and will be complementary to any other signage that goes in the future, so that we're not just creating kind of mixed messages with our project wayfinding that will confuse people in the future. Yes, and then just briefly, in terms of the wayfinding, we've got the signage that we've talked about there, the kind of maps and the finger posts, but then across the project area, there's a common theme, materials used for the different interventions that have been put in. You can see some photos of those, so new entrance points, archways, seating, etc. And there's a common theme, so that it's identifiable that you're within the River Cole Community Commons area. Used Douglas fir for the majority of interventions where possible, because it's sustainable, long lasting, and that was very much a focus of how you link up this project area and make it a kind of recognised community commons site that is for the community and for their use. And as part of this, there's various bits of artwork that Susan will talk about more across the project area, on arches and signways, and in some of the project areas that are based around, a lot of them are based around this design, and you can see this in the centre picture here, based around a design which is a steel wire cross section. So Ties the Energy Park, which I mentioned earlier, is owned by a company called Webster and Horsfall, who are a steel wire manufacturing company, a 300-year-old company. So they've been based in that part of East Birmingham, not for 300 years, but for 170 years. So it's part of that industrial heritage of the area, is around that steel wire manufacturing. And so that cross section and there's different cross-section designs, but that's been used as inspiration for some of the artwork that's gone in around the project area, and then also for this logo you can see in the bottom left on the slides for the River Cole Community Commons. So yes, I think on that I will hand over to Susan.
Thank you, Emily. I'm going to do a bit of tag team between us. I'm going to say, you're going to hear me say click at various points, so bear with me whilst I manage looking at the screen to say click, and then my notes as well. Thank you, Emily. So as part of this project, incorporating arts was really key from the very outset, as Emily's already mentioned. We know from our learning and our experience, and there's plenty of research that supports this, how arts-based approaches can really help to engage people from across different diverse communities, as well as to help address complex issues and tackle inequalities. So we worked with Arts in the Yard, a local community arts organisation based in Yardley, to commission a number of local artists and co-create with the community to deliver a number of arts installations. So if you just click on the first picture, Emily, thank you. So this is a footbridge in a small heath area. It wraps around and goes right over the Small Heath Highway, the 845, the bypass that Emily showed you earlier on the map, that huge long bypass. The highway itself, if you've ever come across it, but you could probably tell on the map, is a typical busy A road, and for many it's a barrier. It cuts off access across the area. The bridge itself is not as well used as it could be, and we know from our engagement work, which I'll talk about later, we know from the engagement that communities do find the bridge intimidating, they find it scary, and some have actually expressed that they're quite wary of what's on the other side. So for a local artist, we engage pupils from the local school to create an art design. So if you just click on the next photo, Emily, create an art design and paint it on the bridge itself, and here's the result. We know from the feedback that that's actually had a really positive effect. People have been taking photos of themselves, walking, dancing across it. And that's just using art as a way of making something seem a bit more bright, a bit more inviting, and to almost welcome people onto that footbridge. Through another local artist, we worked with local residents to design a series of pewter embossed metal tiles, and these are inspired by the Webster and Horsewall cable wire designs that Emily mentioned. So this is a picture of actually members of the community. Actually, once the pewter tiles have been created by the local artist, Mel Berman, they were then distributed through workshops to communities to actually paint and design. And if you just look at the next picture, so if you look really closely, I mean, initially they might look like flowers from a distance, different flower designs, petal designs, but as Emily's mentioned, these are cross sections of the different various cables, wire cables. So yes, the tiles were decorated, and as you can see, the result are 90 wonderfully decorated tiles, and these have been displayed in the local community and green spaces right across the project area, and I'll show you some of those photos later on. Thank you. And the next slide, thank you. Another art piece is this central mosaic, and you saw a picture of it earlier. Handmade with individual pieces, and again specifically designed to represent the cross section, and this is, if you look closely, you can see that the elements of that, and this is designed to fit into that seating area, which you'll see on the top left here, as part of the project area. So that brings the art, the infrastructure, and the history together into a place, and also gives a good focal and talking point as well. Okay, and then the next slide, right on cue, because I just saw Emily come back, right on cue. We finally commissioned a mural for the wall alongside the canal. I mean, it's a long stretch of canal, but there's a specific part where there's quite a clear wall near the Ackers Adventure area, and it wraps around, as you can see. So we commissioned through Arts in the Yard a Birmingham street artist named Martin Hoaxer, I hope I'm saying this right, Martin Hoaxer Edwards. He's well known within the West Midlands graffiti art scene, uses the tag name Hoaxer, and has previously worked on lots of canal and community art projects for school children, with the aim of introducing young people to the power of art and how it can be used to tell stories, to unlock local history, and to really kind of inspire that and ignite that passion for the wildlife and the natural world. So if you look closely, and I'll show you another photo later, but if you look closely, you can see references. You've got references to the world famous Birmingham Small Arms Factory in Armory Road. They manufactured bikes, buses, motorcycles, military and sporting firearms, etc. And I do remember reading that they were also quite regularly a target during World War II as well. There's Webster and Horsfall reference in there. You can see one of the graffiti people holding one of the cables. There's even Canadian geese, which are a common sight in local parks in the area, a heron, and a kingfisher, which is a reference to the Kingfisher County Park, which is a protected natural habitat nearby. And the feedback, not only afterwards, but also during when Hoaxer was painting this on, was really positive. Young people stopped by, and we saw it as we went on a walk as well. Young people stopped by, other graffiti artists in the local area stopped by and asked where it was. And they talked about how they felt really proud of us going up, because there's references to local areas that they're aware of, and the word Small Heath. You know, they know it's Small Heath. Some people don't call the area Small Heath, but they really do, and it really identified with them. Okay, the next slide, please. Thank you. Community engagement was really key as well, all throughout from the very start of this project, and was built into the project. Community engagement activities have been key to connecting people and organisations in the community. Over 60 different events were co-created and delivered from the very start of this project, working with a number of local schools, residents and organisations. If you just have the next image, please. Thank you. So, for example, using the science skills and qualifications of a number of our staff in the Active Wellbeing Society, which were uncovered during this project, we created a variety of citizen science projects. So working with children to show them how to use equipment to do river dipping and testing the river, how to create ecosystems, so that's sound ecosystems, and do some basic air quality checks. And this was all to engage children. As you know, children are really important in terms of actually, well, you'll know from research, in terms of that kind of whole generational impact in terms of behaviour change. So this is really to engage children using science in a way that's fun and learning something at the same time as well. I think next slide, please. Next photo, please. We also worked with communities to close off streets. So that's something that we regularly provide in the Active Wellbeing Society. We do what's called active street closures. So we closed off streets with permission for street parties and also car parks when they were not being used, to bring people together, connect them and their local place through street games, play, physical activity. So you can see there that the very basic kind of big snakes and ladders, community connect, archery, really popular, engaging families and getting them to actually to stop, notice and come and take part. We would do bike repairs, so we took our bike repair mechanics there to do free bike repairs, and also engage communities who wanted to, with a bit of motivation, to come and walk, cycle and explore the area, as well as do litter picks, and alongside that we provided free meals, art and creative activities as well. Next slide, please. Planting, of course, and bringing nature to this is key. And here's just a few images just to demonstrate how nature and green, connecting communities to nature and green spaces were really fundamental. So through our Green and Growing team in the Active Wellbeing Society, we worked with local residents and facilitated a few growing and planting skills activities, such as how to grow plants from seed, as well as build and install 2 large planters along the route. And also refurbish an existing brick planter, a non-street brick planter. So you'll see on the top left, one of the planters has the tiles that you saw earlier. So as I mentioned, those 90 tiles have been installed throughout the project area to bring that consistency in terms of an identifier across the project. So you'll see it on the planter there, and you'll also see it on the top of that wooden archway that Emily mentioned earlier. That's about connecting that corridor and that place to the history and to the people. We also built and installed 20 bird boxes and insect boxes along the corridor, and then more were distributed actually to schools and families as part of our engagement work to get them interested in bird boxes and insect boxes. At this point, I just, I wanted to reiterate, and I've kind of said it throughout, that each of these art pieces that you've seen, the planters, the bird boxes, the insect boxes, they have been designed and deliberately placed along the River Cole project corridor as landmarks. They are a real integral part of the wayfinding, alongside the signage, the maps, and the infrastructure that Emily's talked about as well. Next slide, please. As well as inform the community about the project, we use these engagement activities as we do to gain insights and to build an understanding of the needs, the wishes, the hopes, the barriers that prevent communities from accessing and connecting with their local place and reclaim their rightful space. So we'd use engaging participatory techniques to ask questions, to delve a bit more, to get people's stories. So that co-creation was built throughout from the start to ensure that the project was responsive to local need and informed throughout. This is just that so in total, we engaged over 1,000 people attending across the 64 activities. We also informed a further 965 households and businesses with information leaflets. We supported the development of the local Friends of Cowley Park group, which is running today. We've co-created projects with a network of 5 local schools, and continue to gather ongoing learning. And from that, on the right-hand side is just an example of some of the feedback from one of the consultation engagement events that we've utilised and will continue to build from, such as wanting more community activities specifically for kids, more benches. So you'll notice benches were dotted around the area, and ask to maintain the green spaces, to continue to listen to their concerns, more lighting, more bins, more flowers, more planters. Thank you. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about the legacy and the sustainability. I know we're here to talk about wayfinding, but I think it's really important to also talk about what's happened and what's next as well. So just a few points here. A maintenance plan. From the very start, we built an agreement across the project partners to collectively manage and maintain the various elements of the project outside of the budget life, shall we say. So from maintaining public areas and signs and artworks, to removing litter, clearance vegetation, managing the invasive species if there are any, additional planting, seeding, that's all in a management plan going forward. River Cole Community Commons Stewardship. One of the key next phases is to scope and develop a stewardship body. It's a means by which we hope the work of the ERDF project will be perpetuated and also used as a platform for additional enhancement and improvement. It wouldn't be just about voluntary community groups, because, as Emily mentioned earlier, it's quite a complex area as well, and it's not one single piece of land with different ownerships. So it would be a combination of local community, businesses, public and voluntary bodies that would be more appropriate and effective for continuing this work. So the role of the body would be to encourage the public to come and see, to come and use the area, and bring together the organisations, some of which have responsibilities towards the area and responsible for maintaining the land, keep it clean, safe. So the intention is that the stewardship would help to hold those to account where possible, for maintaining the area. We continue as an organisation, as the other partners do, to engage the local community. It hasn't ended there. We still do physical and social activities in the local area. We are engaging with the Friends of Cowley Park group as well. The learning is continuously informing what we do and how we do things, really importantly. It's not what you do, how you do is really key here. And we've got an ongoing partnership with the schools, the university and other organisations. Our head office is actually based in the Tyseley area as well. So we've started to now build in other activities as a result of the feedback. So we're going to have a share chat, we've got a community cafe and other activities that we're co-delivering in the area. I just want to quickly hand over to Emily, because I think there's a bit here about the opportunities for Birmingham Energy Institute as well.
So I think from Birmingham Energy Institute and the university's perspective, I think as part of that ongoing stewardship, also looking at how the site is a living lab site, essentially for research projects going forward, and how that support both engagement, also continued biodiversity improvements, and linking in with other projects. So that's kind of an area we're developing at the moment. And there's already one project that's started. That's a project between a researcher at the university and the Environment Agency, Birmingham River Champions, which is looking at the wider River Cole, but will be looking at the River Cole Community Commons stewardship and how volunteer groups can be either reinstated or started that will take on the ecological testing and assessment of the river in the area. So yeah, we're looking at those various routes, and then you know, continuing to, as part of our work with Tidesey Energy Park, Webster and Horsfall and the council, about how this continues to integrate with that creation of a green energy innovation zone in the area.
Thank you. Just a last slide before, I know we're conscious of time here. So before we show you a very short, I think we're going to still show a short clip from the video if we've got time, but if not, we can post the video link round. But I just wanted to recap the key to the success of this project. Ultimately, the River Cole Community Commons Project is about connecting people to their local green and blue spaces in active and engaging ways, and co-creating with the local residents, organisations and partners who have that responsibility for various aspects of this area. As you know, the pathway to being physically active and getting out and connecting with others is really complex and difficult for many of the communities that we work with. And our work has shown that alongside the wayfinding, community development and engagement is really important to support, to motivate and change behaviours. A map or a signpost, it on its own can tell you where to go, but in itself, it doesn't necessarily support people on its own to motivate and have to be motivated and have the confidence to get out, to explore, to connect, to get active, or even know that the places and the spaces exist in the first place to go and look for that map or the signpost. And I know that's been mentioned earlier. So it's really important consideration when creating wayfinding solutions is how do you build in that community engagement, and not only to be informed, but to actually change aspects, change what they do, how they do it, and to actually notice and to get out and about. So working with people where they're at, understanding their barriers, building that trust to support and show them the way in engaging ways, such as, you know, we've shown how the bright art and the footbridge can make a difference. The graffiti on the canal wall, graffiti mural art, shall I say, from lead litter pits and walks and rides to let people know how to get about in their area before they go out on their own, and learning new skills to be closer to nature, such as the sowing of the seeds and using the bird boxes. So I kind of wanted to end it on that point about actually it is a holistic approach.